Chapter 21, Inevitable Conflict. You know how it will end. That's why your hand is on the hilt of your sword. After these last few words were spoken, a deafening silence filled the place. Daniel stood just 3 meters behind the escort, while Garth was still facing the fire. His hand was slowly moving over the set of throwing spears that he had left on the ground. A faint moonlight joined the campfire into a dance of weak lights. The only noise that broke the absolute silence was the constant howling of the wind. Shing Swu, the escort's upper body, twisted suddenly, following the arm's horizontal, slashing motion. The aim was parting Daniel's body from his head. Fu Daniel's reaction was fast, managing to avoid the horizontal slash by dropping on one knee. Almost at the same time, he countered by throwing a knife at the man's neck. Swing was the sound of Stu's sword parrying the flying dagger. The man was clearly an experienced fighter, or at least enough to notice the approaching spear at high speed. Fu swashed the spear, clashed against the escort sword, and was thrown to the side, but the sword didn't stop. It kept slashing diagonally towards Daniel. Daniel jumped on his four limbs to avoid the diagonal slash. He then twisted his body in the air and swung his sword at the man's wrist. Stu abandoned the sword and threw a punch at Daniel's body, which was still in midair. Unfortunately, he was forced to retreat once again to avoid a second spear that had just slashed the underside of his bicep. All this takes long to describe, but in reality, it had happened in less than 3 seconds. The escort's arm was bleeding, but the injury wasn't serious. He had underestimated the old man's speed and precision in throwing spears, but more than anything, he had underestimated Daniel. Considering Daniel's age, he believed him to be a cunning teenager at the second rank of martial cultivation. But after finding himself on the wrong side of his throwing knife, he realized that Daniel's strength wasn't any lower than the old man's. He was planning to fight seriously from now on. He lowered his upper body lightly and reached for the inner parts of his boots with his hands. Shying from them, he unsheathed 2 fighting knives. These knives had 2 sharpened edges which joined into a very sharp point. The blade was thin, and one could see how a slash from one of these knives could separate a part of your body from another. Complete silence reigned once again. On Garth's hands, 2 short spears were ready to be thrown at any moment. The rest of the spears were once again strapped to his back. His feet moved slowly, pacing in big circles around the escort position. Stu moved his body in a way that could allow him to keep track of both enemies from the corners of his eyes. Daniel's eyes were glued at Stu's hands. He noticed how the fingertips of his right hand were pinching the handle of the knife. His worries had been confirmed the very next moment. Garth wanted to reach the opposite side and try to divide Stu's attention into 2, like he would have done while hunting for a beast. Unfortunately, that was a mistake. Fighting an experienced fighter was completely different from fighting a ranked beast. The moment the 2 had surrounded the escort, his body rapidly moved. He turned towards Garth, completely ignoring Daniel, which was standing behind him. His left hand moved rapidly, deflecting the sudden spear that was flying towards him at high speed, and with his other hand, he threw one of his knives at Garth. Daniel knew that, at some point, Garth would have been in imminent danger. So he waited until the very last moment, and, as Stu was about to throw his dagger, a thin blade came slashing the back of his hand. The damage wasn't enough to stop him, but it made him miss the correct trajectory that would have certainly killed Garth. As Stu's knife flew, Daniel dashed towards him with his sword in hand. He reached the escort's back in just a moment, but as he was about to slash with his sword, an upright stab came from the left side of Stu's body. The knife dug into flesh and got stuck into something solid. Stu didn't think twice before letting go of the knife and twist his body to the right. His muscular right arm was tense as he swiped it horizontally at the height of Daniel's head. Glish, what he expected to feel was the crushing of bones and splatter of brains when met against his powerful fist. But what he felt instead was a disgusting noise of cut flesh, which accompanied a sharp pain coming from his right arm. He turned around rapidly, and his eyes opened wide in shock at the sight that was presented before him. Daniel's back was slightly bent forward as if he had received a strong punch in the stomach. At his waist height, A gray hand which resembled stone was clutched around the sharpened part of his knife. A few drops of blood dripped down his fingers. His other hand was holding his sword. What shocked him the most was the blood dripping from the blade of Daniel's sword. It was at that moment that he looked down and he noticed it. His right arm had been cut cleanly off his body and was resting at Daniel's feet. "AR guard, you bastard. I will fucking kill you," shouted Stu crazily. Daniel ignored him completely and looked past him. On the other side, Garth was clutching his bleeding forearm, on which Stu's thrown knife had dug deeply. Moments later, the tents started to open slowly. The rest of the party had heard the shouts and had come out to check what had happened. "What is going on here?" inquired Lego, which was the first one to leave his tent. The next voice came from the entrance of another tent, and it was "Celis, are we under attack?" he said while rushing out his tent, bow in hand. "Those bastards. They attacked me out of the blue," tried to explain Stu while clutching his bloody stump. "What?" said Lego as a stupefied expression grew on his face. He then grabbed the handle of his greatsword. At that moment, Fiora left her tent as well. An arrow was knocked in Celis' bow, and his fingers pinched the string tightly. He was ready to draw at a moment's notice. "He is lying. He was heading to the mage's tent in the middle of the night," said Garth between grunts, his arm still bleeding copiously. "I wanted to question her," barked Stu viciously. A voice was heard coming from behind the group. Yella, the mage, had just left her tent and had joined in the conversation. "Swear a key oath that you are telling the truth," she said seriously. A key oath was no joke. In order to swear a key oath, one needed to use their key to nurture their spirit, as if they were practicing spiritual cultivation. But the thing about spiritual cultivation was that it required the practitioner's spirit to be completely calm. People's emotions were born from their minds, but what they affected was the spirit. An emotion would always make one's spirit waver. A wavering spirit wasn't something dangerous. After all, everyone felt strong emotions at any moment in their lives without any consequence. What was dangerous was trying to nurture a wavering spirit. Trying to connect a wavering spirit with the immense calmness of the spiritual plane would injure one's spirit, which if continued for long, would then shatter and dissipate. Prisoners, enslaved practitioners, dying spiritual cultivators that didn't wish to suffer during the last moments of their lives. Countless people within the infinite flow of time had taken their own lives with this method. It was through the constant loss of lives that the mages of old had created various methods to chain one's spirit to the body in order to prevent slaves or prisoners from committing suicide. A similar result could be seen when cultivating one's body. If one cultivated their body with a wavering spirit, their emotions would grow stronger and deeper to a point when they would backlash and damage their minds and, in the long run, would turn them crazy. In order for an oath to be deemed valid, one needed to receive a neutral person's key and use it to cultivate. The third person would then verify that the key was in fact being used to cultivate, and if there were no negative reactions to the swearing person's body, the oath would be considered valid. It was a simple way to verify if one's claims were truthful or not. Stu's teeth gritted at the mention of the key oath. He didn't expect for someone that knew of such a method to be here. This method was mostly used by the military and other powerful forces to verify the loyalty of their members or the truthfulness of their reports. Yala rapidly explained to the group how a key oath worked. She then looked at the wounded escort and continued, "You claim that they attack you first, so you should swear first." After earning the agreement of everybody present, she started heading towards Stu. The usual procedure was to place one's hand on the practitioner's back for the entire duration of the oath. But when she moved within Stu's arm reach, his uninjured arm flashed as fast as lightning. The next moment, Yala's back was pressed against Stu's chest, and around her neck his strong hand was wrapped tightly. One move, and he'll snap her neck. Stu growled hatefully. He had been cornered one too many times. The eyes of everybody present grew hostile towards Stu. They now understood who was telling the truth. The only one who was calm was Daniel. He had been the only one to notice a small detail. Yala didn't appear to be scared. Sela pointed his bow at Stu, but he didn't dare to draw. Ligo's grip to his greatsword's handle tightened, while Fiora's hands reached for the bolus hung to her waist. I want to say it again. Cough move. And she coughed eyes. Sta started to feel strange. A deep cold was seeping through his body. His severed arm had stopped bleeding, and his stump's color had started to darken. The moment he noticed that something was wrong, his fingers were already too rigid to tighten around the girl's neck. His complexion turned paler by the second, and whenever he coughed, his saliva felt like crushed ice in his mouth. Pop Pop Yala's delicate hands grabbed Stu's fingers, and after applying a bit of pressure, two clear popping sounds could be heard. She had freed herself by snapping Stu's frozen fingers off his hand. Peepleesh coughed on, tried to beg Sua, but due to the frozen state of his body, he was unable to talk. Yala pressed her small hand against Stu's chest and kept forcing ice essence into it. After no more than 10 seconds, every liquid within his body had been turned into ice. The last thing Stu felt before dying was the feeling of his blood freezing inside his veins. Once dead, Yala retreated her hand. She then bowed deeply towards Daniel and Garth. I was aware of his intentions since the moment I joined the party. She said to Daniel. Then while looking at both, she continued, "Thank you for protecting me." Just a wandering hero's second objective completed. Reward: 700 karma points / golden cauldron reputation plus 50%. Whoa. Saving that girl was worth 50% of a group's reputation. I wonder who she is. You've scored big here. Sua's voice resounded within Daniel's mind. Daniel nodded at her slightly, then walked towards Garth. "You all right, old man?" said Daniel. "Don't call me old man, you little monster. Just call me Garth," responded Garth without missing a beat. His voice turned fainter as he continued, "Thank you." Chapter 22 System Upgrade. It was the middle of the night, and everyone had gone back to their tents. Inside his, Daniel was sitting quietly with his eyes closed. His entire attention had been focused on his profile. Dan Heel, Karmic Systems wielder. Age, 14 rank. Details, Karma, 1969 weapons masteries. Details, martial arts. Details, spells. Details, system upgrades. Details, a brand new section of the system had been unlocked, and Daniel couldn't wait to learn more about it. He then focused on the system's upgrade details, and a new window appeared. System upgrades LV. 1 reap what you've sown equals 500 KP. Passive. Killing rewards the mirror amount of karma owned by the victim. Time is precious LV. 1 is equal to 750 KP. Active. Double the cost of karma points in order to double the speed of progression. Plus 100 of cost and effect. Max LV 10. Reduced cost LV. 1 is equal to 1000 KP. Passive. Permanently decreases the consumption of karma points by 10%. An additional 10% per level. Max LV 10. Bonus points LV. 1 is equal to 1000 KP. Passive. Permanently increases the karma points received by 10%. An additional 10% per level. Max LV 10. Second chance LV1 equals 5000 KP. Passive. Once per month, the user will be brought back to 2 seconds before the moment of his death. 2 additional seconds per level. Max LV 10. Karma X luck equals 30,000 KP. Passive. Your overall luck is dependent to the amount of positive or negative karma. Accumulate 200,000 karma points to unlock system upgrades LV. 2. Daniel's jaw dropped the very next moment. The upgrades were amazing, and he couldn't believe his eyes. There were some that could shape his luck depending on his karma, or even some that could bring him back to life. The stupor in his eyes lasted for a good 5 minutes. If one could see Daniel right now, they would notice his accelerated breath and his shaky hands. Ha ha ha. Look at you. You look like a brat in a candy shop. Ha ha ha. Sua's voice resounded within Daniel's mind, taking him back to reality. Daniel read the upgrades descriptions. Once again, how many features are there left to unlock? He asked to Sua. After a few moments, Sua responded with his usual vagueness. How am I supposed to know that? Such an answer was within Daniel's expectations. He wasn't sure what Sua was, except for being part of the system. But now a new guess had formulated in his mind, and that was that Sua was part of an undiscovered feature within the system. He didn't have any solid proof to his claims, but after unlocking one feature after the other, he couldn't help but to convince himself that there were still many secrets to Sua's character. Until now, he had simply believed that the system was Sua, as he instinctively knew the use of every unlocked feature. But that was simply because he wasn't aware of how little he knew about the system. What made him change his mind was the fact that the undiscovered features were a mystery for Sua as well. Daniel dropped the subject and focused back to the system's upgrades. I assume that I simply have to think about an upgrade to purchase it. He muttered to himself. Ha ha. Sua's laugh could be heard once again. I thought pretty boys were supposed to be stupid. Daniel had no intention of humoring Sua, so he went through the upgrades once more and made his choice. Dan Heel, Karmic Systems wielder. Age, 14 rank, details, Karma, 719 weapons masteries, details, martial arts, details, spells, details, reap what you've sown time, is precious LV. One system upgrades, details, I guess I should try this out. Mumbled Daniel to himself. He then grabbed his bag and took out all the beast cores that he found in the summoner's bag. He only had 9 rank 2 and 2 rank 3 beast cores. He had never tried to cultivate with cores above level 1, except for that one time where Sua forced him unconscious, so he decided to start with the rank 2 beast cores. His consumption without beast cores was of 3 karma points per hour, while with the use of beast cores, it would be 10 times faster. Of course, the karma system was only able to shorten the time required to absorb the beast essence and refine his body. It was in no way capable of reducing the amount of essence needed for the refinement. He would still need just as much ki or beast essence as anybody else. The only difference was that for him, the absorption and refinement was drastically hastened. Daniel knew that there was no way for these few beast cores to be enough for him to reach the perfect state of body strengthening. So he decided to refine his spirit instead. He was unsure of when he would manage to have enough beast cores to attempt to break through the perfect state of the body strengthening stage. So, since he had found a use in learning magic, he decided to practice it. After calming his mind, he activated time is precious and sat in a meditating position. He then started to absorb the beast essence within the 2 rank 2 beast cores he was holding in his hands. Daniel had never practiced spiritual cultivation before, but he had gotten used to sensing his spirit when learning stone skin. He remembered the content of the basics of spiritual cultivation and started to follow the method described in it. He let the absorbed spiritual essence fill his entire body, and then gave up control over it, letting his spirit assimilate it slowly. Normally, an essence whose control had been renounced would dissipate, but the spirit was omnipresent within a cultivator's body, so as long as the essence was within one's body, the spirit would slowly assimilate it. Daniel focused on the correct method of cultivation, and in the blink of an eye, 2 hours had passed. 6 of the rank 2 beast cores had been consumed, and Daniel's karma points had decreased from 719 to 599. The karma consumption was exactly double what he would have spent without activating time is precious. What left him excited was that his spiritual cultivation had increased by leaps and bounds. From the early rank 2, or faint spiritual connection substage, he had reached the late profound spiritual connection, or late rank 3. As of now, his spiritual cultivation was almost on par with his martial cultivation. Daniel's consciousness focused on sensing the changes within his body. His muscles, skin, and bones protected him like an armor. His blood was being pumped through his enhanced heart and forced into every corner of his body through his dilated blood vessels. His physical body functioned like a well-oiled machine. The only difference was that now, he could feel his ever-present spirit flooding through the entirety of his body. No matter if it was blood, skin, organs, or muscles, his spirit was a constant and quiet part of it. Feeling the changes within his spirit, Daniel started to wonder about the 2 types of cultivation. Various questions that millions before him had asked, but to which nobody had ever found an answer to. He understood the conflicting parts between the two types of cultivation, but why was there no problem with the two being cultivated together until one reached the second stage? This subject had been the center of thousands of studies through history, but no matter what kingdom, continent, or race one came from, the answer to this question had been a mystery to any cultivator underneath the sky that had a genuine interest in practicing both types of cultivation to a higher level. Daniel wasn't any better at guessing than anybody else before him. So he put that question aside and started to consider his situation. It didn't take long before he realized his major problem. I need to learn more skills. He mumbled to himself after opening his eyes. He was right. Daniel had been lucky to have fought against a member of the military at the third rank. Every power had their own speciality, and the military was an exception. The speciality of the military was tactical formations. Every person who decided to take the military life would be required to study and practice tactical formations. In fact, part of the test that one needed to pass in order to advance past the lieutenant grade was knowing every type of formations so that, in case a war broke out, they would be able to make use of them. Individual skills were only taught to officers above the grade of lieutenant, like captains and captains of the guard. That meant that had their battle been a one-on-one and hadn't Stu underestimated Daniel since the beginning, their fight would have probably ended differently. Luckily, Stu is only an elite sergeant, so his competence with individual skills were severely lacking. Despite that, he had still been a dangerous opponent to Daniel and Garth. What Daniel needed the most was to gain combat experience and learn fighting skills like true motion or stone skin. Unfortunately, just like before, the first thing he needed to do was to earn money. The rest of the night passed quietly while Daniel pushed his spiritual cultivation forward. And after spending 3 more hours and an entire rank 3 beast core to reach the peak of the spiritual connection stage, he finally stopped. Bright rays of light seeped through the small holes within the fabric of his tent, so he got up and went out. Outside, around the faintly lit fire, the rest of the party was sitting quietly while eating. About 10 meters from the camp, the body of Stu was laying, completely covered by a large sheet that the rest of the group had found inside his bag. All of them were experienced hunters, and waking up early had long been a habit to them. Daniel approached the group and sat on a large tree stump. He then took a piece of dried meat from his backpack and started to eat it quietly. Time passed awkwardly until a voice broke the silence. It was Celis. "What do you guys want to do? We don't have an escort anymore," he said dispiritedly. At that point, Yala left Stu's tent, which she had decided to use after killing him. She had heard Celis' question and decided to intervene. "What are you guys worried about? 2 of you are at the third rank. Hell, Daniel's cultivation is on par with the dead soldiers," she said. The rest of the group, except for Garth, looked at Daniel with a stupefied looks painted on their face. They were aware that he wasn't a simple bronze hunter, but they didn't expect him to be this powerful. After all, he was just 14 years old. Reaching the peak of the third rank at 14 years old wasn't impossible, but it would still require an abnormal talent, or at the very least, to start practicing right after being born. Yala ignored the surprised looks on the faces of the group and went to sit oddly close to Daniel. Lego picked up right away and asked Daniel, "Do you think you can act as our escort if we end up in trouble? I have a contract with the Huntsman Guild like you guys. I won't get paid to act like an escort." He paused before continuing, "But if we do end up in trouble, I won't just let you die." Daniel didn't know, but most of them didn't simply hunt for the sake of earning money. In fact, hunters earned more money than they needed to live a normal life. So what many amongst those who risked their lives by going out to hunt needed was a large amount of money for one particular reason or another. For example, Fiora was terminally ill, and the siblings' only hope for a cure was to hire a healer. Garth was paying for his 2 daughters' studies, and finally, Sella was saving money to organize a wedding for him and his fiancée. "That's enough for me," said Sella right away. Lego looked at his sister fondly, then turned towards Daniel and said, "We are in. They'll come too. I came here pick herbs, so I won't steal any of your praise. Also, I am not so bad in a fight," she said while hitting Daniel's arm with her elbow, but the moment her elbow touched his arm, her eyes widened in shock and she jumped up in place. "What the hell?" she shouted. Why you were just at the early moderate spiritual connection. Chapter 23, The Hunt, begins. What the hell? Yala shouted before whispering to herself in disbelief. Why you were just at the early moderate spiritual connection. A series of confused reactions appeared on the faces of everyone present. Daniel's face was the most surprised as he jumped from a scare. What? What's wrong with you? He said through gritted teeth. Yala calmed down immediately and responded. And nothing. Sorry. Yala's shock was understandable. The moment Daniel had touched her face with his hand to keep her quiet, she knew immediately that he wasn't the summoner she had been fighting with, as she had felt a spirit at the early moderate spiritual connection stage through contact with his body. The spirit she had felt now, on the other hand, was more than a full substage stronger. Such a progress in a single night was impossible. One had to understand that Yala herself was considered a genius among spiritual cultivators, and yet, despite all the help she had received, she had still taken more than a year to reach the peak of the spiritual connection stage. After meeting Daniel, all she could do was doubt her ability to discern the strength of another spiritual cultivator. That was much easier than believe she, as a genius, could be outpaced to this extent. Sinlia mountain range, canyon's entrance, 1324. After a long morning of travel, the party finally managed to reach the canyons that separated the mountains within the Sinlia mountain range. Various wooden signs had been placed at the entrance of the canyons, and right before them, various camps had been set. These camps belonged to mining companies and would usually house miners and slaves, but right now, they mostly housed the hunting parties to which the mission of clearing the canyons had been assigned to. Daniel's party was only one of many. Lego stepped out from the rest of the party and said he'll go report to the head hunter and pick up our spatial bag. Wait for me. He looked around for a moment, then continued. There has to be a tavern around here. We'll meet there. He then took off alone. To Daniel, Lego's departure wasn't a problem. He had already judged this teenager as a trustworthy person. To prove it was the fact that he didn't attack the very moment Stu had tried to turn them against him, and instead listened to both versions. Not to mention, he didn't believe he would leave his sister Fiora alone if he didn't consider them trustworthy as well. Daniel saw himself in Lego, even though much younger. It took them a bit of walking to finally end up in front of a large tent. Loud chatting noise could be heard coming from inside, and it sounded like something interesting was happening. The moment they entered, they saw a crowd of at least 50 people surrounding a table, on which 3 people were sitting. On the table, a few cards were placed facing up next to a small pile of copper and silver coins. Daniel's party ignored the crowd and headed towards a counter. They then ordered some food and sat at an empty table to the side. And it looked like a human. Asterisk kick. Asterisk with the tail of a scorpion and 2 claws for hands. That's ridiculous. You're just a silver hunter. Had you really seen a commander steelback scorpion, her body would be half-eaten and rotting in a ditch inside the canyons. A rank 4 beast. No way a chump like you would have survived. For the next 15 minutes, shouts and laughter could be heard inside the tavern. Until finally, the crowd dispersed. The only people remaining at the table were 3 men, 2 of them completely drunk, while the other was smirking and moving the coins towards his side of the table. From what Daniel heard, he understood that one of the 2 drunken men at the table had spotted a commander steelback scorpion within the depths of the canyon. One person after another surrounded him when he started to describe the beast. They were all hunters after all, and if there really was a rank 4 beast within their hunting ground, they wanted to know. The moment the crowd dispersed, a group of 3 shady-looking men with dark Goldie D badge on their chests approached Daniel's table and looked at them menacingly. Their weapons suggested that they weren't here to hunt beasts. That's our table, said the one in the front. Garth and Daniel ignored the man's words, while Celis' look turned into a fearful one. He was an archer, and in no way used to melee combat. Not to mention that the 3 were mercenaries, and gold rank at that. Each of them was way, just as, if not more dangerous than their previous escort. Yala was the first to talk. The table was clean, and you weren't sitting here. Also, there are other free tables, she said in a matter-of-fact tone after taking her hood off. When the group of shady men noticed Yala and Fiora, sitting amongst their party. Their expression changed from threatening into faces filled with lust. One of them approached Yella and said, "Pretty mage, why don't you ditch these scaredy cats and play with us instead?" His lips parted into a disgusting smile, showing a set of yellow teeth. "Don't worry, you'll always have a place to sit on with us." Hee hee, he added while slapping his thighs. The very next moment, before anyone could react to the man's words, another man had appeared within the group of mercenaries. His arms amicably wrapped around two mercenaries' necks, and on his face, the most carefree of smiles. This man seemed to be in his late 20s, and his slightly shorter stature when compared to the mercenaries made him look slightly funny. He couldn't be considered a handsome man, but his carefree smile could convince anyone that he was the most innocent of men. There were no weapons strapped on this man's body. The only thing he had above his clothes was a dark black badge wrapped in chains which was hanging loosely from his belt. The expressions within the group of mercenaries changed once again. They had just finished protecting whiny hunters and didn't want to be interrupted when trying to hit on girls, so their reactions was all but corried out. They turned to look at the newcomer, but as soon as they noticed his face and the black badge hanging from his belt, they froze in place. "Miss Yella, it's an honor to see you here," said the man with the black badge, while bowing his head slightly. He then looked at the mercenaries, with his smile always present. What Daniel's party saw afterwards was something that surprised them greatly. One of the mercenaries underneath the man with the black badge's arms took a step towards the one that had been rude to the two girls and punched him square in the face with all the strength he had. The rude mercenary fell on the ground heavily. His lip had been split open and blood filled his mouth. But to their utmost surprise, he neither complained nor gotten angry at his friend. It was like he knew that he deserved to be hit. The man with the black badge took his arm off from the shoulder of the other mercenary and looked back at Yella. "Please bring my greetings to your great-grandfather." He then turned around and left. The group of mercenaries stood in place until the man with the black badge left the tavern. They then looked at Daniel's party and bowed deeply. The rude man said through bloody teeth, "Apologies, my lady. Have a good meal." They then left the tavern as well. Silence reigned within the Daniel and the rest of the party for a few long minutes, until it was broken by Sella. "Who the hell was that? And why was he so polite to you?" Yalla didn't answer, and instead kept eating her food. It was Garth that answered him, that a rank 5 mercenary. At this moment, the cloth that served as the tent's door opened, and Lego entered the tavern. He quickly noticed the group sitting at the table and joined them. He then showed a large bag made out of what looked like a giant beast bladder and said, "I've got the spatial bag. Our hunting ground is 3 kilometers into the canyons. The numbers are decreasing, so the price is now 75 silver coins per carcass and 5 gold coins per core." "Great," said Fiora after listening to her brother's report. Lego's face turned slightly more serious before continuing also. Eve heard that there were sightings of a commander's steelback scorpions, so we should always be ready to flee. Sella jumped into the conversation and asked, "When do you guys want to go?" "Tomorrow morning. We only have a few hours of light left today," Daniel said casually. After finishing their meals, the party split and went to rest for the night. They had agreed to meet at the entrance of the canyons at the first lights in the morning. Daniel had an entire evening to spend, so instead of going to rest, he left his tent and went towards the shops. There were only 3 shops: a smith shop that sold and repaired weapons and armors, an alchemist, and a bookstore. The bookstore was, of course, not a common bookstore. The entire store was a simple stand whose books didn't number higher than 40, and all of them, being books sold within a camp filled with hunters and mercenaries, were bestiaries, weapon skills, and martial arts. That was the reason why Daniel went straight to it. When Daniel approached the booth, the vendor welcomed him immediately. "Welcome, young warrior. Is there a book in particular you are looking for?" Daniel looked at the vendor and said, "Can I take a look at the strongest sword techniques you have?" The vendor took 3 books from behind a small stand and placed them on the counter, one next to the other. Daniel glanced at the names written on the covers. From left to right, they were splitting key, mid/turn, and through stone and steel. 2 of these books were slashing skills, while the third was a skill for piercing. "They'll take them all," said Daniel decisively. He then handed 3 owed money over to the vendor and went back to his tent. The next morning, Daniel had spent the whole night practicing, so he was the first to arrive, and as the agreed time drew near, one after the other, the rest of the party arrived as well. Once regrouped, they departed for their hunting ground right away. After entering the canyons, they traversed 2 kilometers of rocky path whose sides were made of tall walls. These walls were composed of various types of stones and minerals, which gave their stony surface uncountable layers of red, gray, and orange colors. At the base of these walls, numerous abandoned mine entrances could be seen. The signs of recent fighting were everywhere, as this part of the canyons had been recently cleared. The party took an entire hour of walking in order to reach the ground assigned to them. And as they arrived, they noticed another hunting party leaving through the way they had come from. Daniel and the rest of the party started to set the traps right in front of the marked scorpions' nests, then waited patiently. It didn't take long before they heard the unmistakable sound of keratinous little feet hitting the solid rock. They all turned towards the source of the sound and saw a silver scorpion the size of an adult's forearm crawl outside of a hole in the wall. "Well, I guess this signs the start of our hunt. Who wants it first?" said Sella to ease his tension. Chapter 24 history repeats itself for the following 10 hours. Daniel and the rest of his party hunted down every single one of these half-meter-long scorpions the very moment they left their nests. The behavior of steelback scorpions was unusual when compared to normal scorpions. In fact, they weren't solitary hunters. They were eusocial instead and formed colonies under a single higher-ranking scorpion king. The scorpion king was a variation of the more common steelback scorpion and was called diamondback scorpion. The reason why this particular species of scorpions was too dangerous to be left alone was that these colonies were in constant war with one another. Their territoriality and aggressiveness forced them into constant conflict. These bloody battles would not only mean the reduction amongst numbers of colonies, but also the strengthening of the winning ones. Ranked beasts evolved by consuming beast cores of other beasts after all. This situation had forced fierce hunting groups to set a periodical hunting seasons, with the purpose of lessening the numbers of steelback scorpions in the area. This hunting season was so popular that the encampment that would be otherwise filled with miners and slaves would be vacated and occupied by the large amount of hunters and mercenaries instead. Unfortunately, this particular hunting season had started sooner than predicted, with the consequence of many losses amongst miners and slaves. After 10 full hours, the numbers of scorpions the party had hunted was close to 100. The 2 siblings were an amazing duo of hunters. Fiora was experienced with her bolus and always managed to tangle the prey long enough for her brother Lego to have them with his greatsword. They alone had killed close to 25 scorpions. Garth's precision with throwing spears was impressive. Before the scorpions could hope to rush at him, or sometimes even see him, they would find their bodies being skewered by one of his throwing spears. The only downside was having to recover his weapons, and sometimes stop his hunt to resharpen the heads. His preys numbered 23. Sella, with his 18 scorpions, was the least successful hunter, but as odd as it may sound, he was also the most skilled at his. His arrows would never miss a target and could easily perforate in between the scorpius and keratinous mandibles. Unfortunately, like Garth, he needed to recover his arrows after the prey died. What slowed him the most, though, was waiting for the scorpions to bleed to death, since differently from Garth, he could not finish them from up close. Unluckily for the scorpions, the only parts hard as steel were in fact their abdomen and heads. The reason for this particular characteristic was, at least for Daniel, hilarious. These beasts had evolved by hunting their own kin, so they needed a back armor resistant enough to stand strike of their own stingers, as they would often be struck by their enemies and sometimes strike themselves by mistake. These scorpions would usually lose this major flaw after their advancement to the 3rd rank, as they would not only gain a stronger armor, an additional set of legs, and a better control of their bodies, but also a rank 3 beast level intelligence. Daniel was a full substage higher than the beasts they were hunting, which made the hunt a walk in the park for him. So he took this hunt as a way to practice his knives, throwing abilities instead. Every thrown knife would either strike the base of the tail, the soft jaws, and sometimes even the beady eyes of the scorpions, causing them to make a shrill scream and panic before being finished by a rapid slash of his sword. Shlu Daniel removed the beast core from the poison gland of the last scorpion he had killed, while the rest of the group prepared for the travel back. Once again, Daniel got to witness the mystical workings of the spatial bag. This hunt had not only been Daniel's first hunting trip, but also the first time he had come into contact with an item enhanced with spatial magic. Noticing Daniel surprised the first time he saw the spatial bag, Yala gave him a brief explanation on how enhanced items and spatial magic worked. Aside from that, all Yala did was follow the party quietly. She would never intervene in one of their fights. The only thing she seemed interested in doing was picking the plants and flows that grew on the rocky ground. It was early evening when the party decided to head back to camp. The group's morale was very high. No major accident had happened, and their hunt had been very productive. Unfortunately, things not always go as planned. The moment they picked their bags and started to head back, they heard a slight tremble coming from the wall to their left. Their heads turned in unison, but all they saw was the usual large wall. The tremble grew stronger the more time passed, until suddenly a crack appeared on its surface. Rocks and pebbles of various sizes detached from the wall and crashed heavily against the ground, lifting small clouds of dust. Daniel's eyes opened wide in shock as a shiver ran down his spine. He turned towards the rest of the party and shouted, "Run!" But before anyone could react, the wall exploded, making boulders and dust fly everywhere. The entire party had been swept up by a dense, dusty cloud, which blinded them completely. The only noise that could be heard was a deafening screeching scream and loud fighting noises. Daniel didn't know what to do or where his party members were, so he wasn't able to protect them. Luckily, the loud noises came from in front of him, so he was fairly sure that they were safe. For now, at least. The source of the deafening noise was slowly moving, preventing the dusty cloud to settle once and for all and allow them to recover their vision. It was clear to him that, within the cloud of dust, two powerful entities were battling. Moving at this point was out of the question. All he could do was to stand still and hope that these two battling parties wouldn't notice him. A few long minutes passed before the intensity of the battle started to decrease. The dusty cloud started to slowly settle, and Daniel was finally able to see the shapes of the battling monsters. One of them had a humanoid shape and stood on 2 feet, with an height nearing the 3 meters. The two details that convinced Daniel that he wasn't witnessing a battle between humans were the 2 enormous claws placed where a normal person's hands would be, and the thick 5 meters long tail attached to his lower back. The other beast had a more monstrous appearance. Daniel could see a straight and thin body on which dozens of disgusting-looking pair of legs grew. Each of these legs were twice as long as the body itself, and were covered in millions of tiny quills. At the frontal extremity of this beast's body, a human-like thorax grew. This thorax had no head attached, and instead, several small mandibles kept closing and opening, as if pushing the food inside the beast's mouth, which was situated right in the middle of his chest. It looked like an enormous centipede with a human thorax attached to its extremity. 2 extremely long antennae grew on its shoulders, and right below were 2 additional long arms whose extremities looked like sharpened blades. Daniel remembered the description he had heard in the tavern and recognized the first beast as the Commander Steelback Scorpion. He didn't know what the other beast was, but since it was capable of fighting on par with a rank 4 beast, then it probably was a beast of the 4th rank as well. More time passed, and the cloud of dust had almost completely settled. Daniel could see more clearly now, and was able to notice the state in which beasts were. 2 words came to his mind: severely injured. The Commander Scorpion's armor was covered in deep cuts which leaked white fatty liquids, and one of its arms was missing entirely. The other creature wasn't doing any better. Various of his thin feet were broken, and its back had been punctured right in the middle by the scorpion's Achilles. Daniel looked around and noticed that the rest of the team was further away. Apparently, they had backed away the moment the wall had exploded. They then remained at the edges of the dusty fog, waiting for him to come out. The other members of the party was Daniel standing there, but before they could feel relieved, they noticed the two beasts battling right behind him. The battle's pace was becoming sluggish, as the two beasts' exhaustion increased. Unfortunately, Daniel's cover had almost completely disappeared, so, while still afraid of being noticed, he tried to back away slowly. The rest of the party had already recognized the Commander Steelback Scorpion and went into hiding. The moment Daniel moved, he was immediately noticed by the Commander Scorpion, which looked at him and let out a furious, shrill scream. It was during this moment of distraction that the centipede's thin legs moved. The beast rushed at the Commander Scorpion and threw itself against its body. The moment the centipede landed on the scorpion, it quickly caged its entire body with its thin legs. The scorpion reacted rapidly and pinched two of the centipede's legs with its remaining claw, tearing them right off. Its long tail also punctured its enemy's back again and again, in hope to make it retreat, but the centipede never let go. It instead tightened its hold around the scorpion's body, keeping it still while it tried to tear the scorpion's head to pieces with its strong mandibles. This was Daniel's chance. He turned around and started to run away from the two battling beasts, but before he could go far, the scorpion smashed his tail on the ground, then again and again. The tail moved faster than Daniel could see, and whenever the tail hit, the ground would tremble. The Commander's Steelback Scorpion was a rank 4 beast, so its hits were rapid and precise. It didn't take long before the ground started to crack. The scorpion was an intelligent creature and knew that it was in a dangerous position. It was injured and it couldn't get out of the centipede's grip. Luckily, it had grown up inside these canyons, and it knew them like it knew its own body. The cracks grew wider and wider under the relentless hits of the scorpion's tail, until finally, the ground started to cave in right underneath the two beast bodies. The cracks had reached way past Daniel's position, so when the ground caved in, Daniel lost his footing and ended up being swallowed by the enormous sinkhole that was created. When Daniel woke up, he found himself in a massive dark cave, laying on his back against solid, yet wet stone. The first thing he noticed after waking up was a small-looking hole on the roof of the cave, through which faint moonlight shined. At his feet, he felt the calming feeling of water. He got up and tried to gather his bearings. He had been laying on a rock, right at the edge of a small underground lake. He then noticed the familiar colored boulders that had fallen with him, and after a sudden realization, a shiver ran through his spine. What Daniel had realized was that if he had fallen a second earlier, he would have landed heavily against rocks. Instead, he had landed in the lake and had managed to survive, even though he had lost consciousness. Daniel could see almost nothing of his surroundings. The only part clear enough was the small area brightened by the light, which were shining through the distant hole on the roof. Clank, clack, a few rocks fell from the top of a pile of large boulders, making the sound of rock hitting rock reverberate through the entire cave. Daniel had noticed this pile of boulders, and most importantly, he had noticed the ghee liquids flowing at its base. Suddenly, one of the large rocks was pushed away, uncovering the large claw of the Commander's Steelback Scorpion. The moment the big boulder was moved aside, Daniel went into hiding. One rock after the other started to roll down the pile, as the figure of the Commander's Steelback Scorpion crawled out of it. Its body was a complete wreck. The thick tail was broken in 3 parts and dangled without control. The side of his waist had been smashed, and the scorpion had been forced to rip that part of his body altogether, along with the leg connected to it, in order to free itself. Huge chunks of white meat dripped out of the impressive-looking injury. After Daniel was looking at the scorpion's conditions, he noticed a couple of moving legs hooking onto the pile of boulders and dragging the body of the centipede out of it. The centipede wasn't in better conditions when compared to the scorpion. In fact, it seemed to be faring worse. While the scorpion's body was compact and resistant, the centipede's many thin legs, which spanned almost 10 meters each, were not as resistant and even if it didn't die from the fall, it still couldn't avoid losing all of its legs but four. It could still crawl, but the scorpion's poison had taken effect long ago. Without an external intervention, the centipede would die soon, and the scorpion will be able to consume its core and recover. The two beasts started to weakly attach each other once again. The centipede tried to pierce the scorpion's body with its remaining legs, while the scorpion tried to smash the centipede's body with the only part of his body that was left unharmed. Its only arm. Each attack did little damage, but Daniel could still feel the ground under his feet tremble under the pressure of the mighty blows. There was no doubt in Daniel's mind that allowing the scorpion to recover meant sure death for him. Daniel started to look for a way to finish the heavily injured scorpion, and after looking around for a while, he had an idea. He suddenly dropped on his knees and pressed one hand against stone and one against the soft soil. He then focused on the feeling of the earth essence, and for a moment, he lost himself into that feeling. A few long seconds passed before a faint earthquake made the ground shake once more, but this time, the earthquake hadn't been caused by the two battling beasts. From the rocky ground in front of Daniel, a bunch of small-sized rocks started to converge. They formed a small pile that increased in size at each moment, only stopping after they reached the height of 2.5 meters. These piled-up rocks stopped piling up, but kept moving while still remaining attached together. They started to shift into specific positions. Soft soil made its way from underneath Daniel's feet, joining the moving pile of stones and filling the empty spaces between shifting rocks. The stones and ground took the shape of a rudimentary golem. This was one of the elementals which Daniel had learned how to summon from one of the books he had found within the belongings of the bandit mage. The golem described in the manual of summoning should have resembled the summoner completely, but that was only at the stage of mastery. This had been the first time Daniel had summoned an elemental, and the final product was a humanoid giant made out of stones and soil. If Daniel had had enough practice with fire element, flaming wisp, he could have tried to summon a lava elemental similar to the one the bandit mage used. Daniel unsheathed his sword and stayed in hiding. He wanted to finish off the scorpion, but he had no intention of going against two rank 4 beasts at once, even if injured. It didn't take long before the commander's steelback scorpion clawed the remaining 4 legs of the centipede and ripped them off one by one, leaving it helpless with hundreds of bloody stumps. Incapable of moving, the centipede could do nothing but squirm and wait for the scorpion to finish him off. Without missing a beat, the scorpion raised his only remaining arm and smashed his big claw against the centipede's back at full strength, right where he had punctured it with his Achilles. The centipede's body split in half, and gooey green paste flew in every direction for tens of meters. The moment the scorpion dropped in front of the centipede's body, right as he was about to shove its face into its insides and recover the centipede's core, a sharp throwing dagger hit the broken part of its dangling tail and cut it off completely. The scorpion let out a shrill cry and turned towards Daniel. It then bent its knee and propelled itself against him at an amazing speed. Daniel saw the body of the commander scorpion gliding above the ground while approaching him, and for a moment, he thought he was done for. But before the beast could reach him, a big stone golem dropped from above a large boulder and nailed the scorpion's body on the ground just a few meters before Daniel. The scorpion felt the hit, but that wasn't nearly enough to finish it off. It managed to pick itself up with its leg as if he was covered in soft sand, but that was enough time for Daniel. While the dying beast was pushing itself up with its remaining claws, Daniel rushed at him at full speed and slashed at its shoulder vertically. Normally, a rank 3 warrior could hardly injure a rank 4 beast, but this was no normal attack. If one could look closely, they would notice a thin blue light shine through the edge of Daniel's sword. Daniel had learned this sword skill right before departing for the hunting grounds. The skill's name was Splitting Key, and Daniel had spent a good part of the previous night practicing it. The slash had left a lingering thread of blue light wherever the blade passed, and luckily, it didn't stop when it encountered the hard shell of the scorpion, detaching its arm from the rest of its body. The scorpion, which was still trying to free itself from the soft ground and rocks, let out the loudest of the screams he had let out so far. Daniel felt his eardrums about to burst and panicked. He let go of his sword and covered his bleeding ears with both hands. Too weak to fight back, the dying scorpion gave its all with a final screeching scream, hoping that Daniel would choose retreat. The scream was so loud that at a certain point Daniel couldn't take it anymore, and its eardrums finally ruptured. Under an immense amount of pain, Daniel decided to give up protecting his ears and instead grabbed two knives from the sheaths strapped to its thigh and used the second skill he had learned through stone and steel to stab them into the screaming head of the scorpion. The pointy ends of the knives shined with blue light and perforated swiftly into the scorpion's human-like head. The hit was effective, but unfortunately, it didn't finish the struggling scorpion. The screeching sound kept going as Daniel picked his sword from the ground, and after focusing all his remaining ki on the edge of the blade, he used splitting ki once again to decapitate it. Only after the scorpion's head rolled on the ground, the sonic attack finally ended. Daniel's face was purple-red at this point. He could barely keep himself from falling on his knees, and his ears were bleeding profusely. He felt like he had been hit in the head with a sledgehammer and couldn't help but feel like he could vomit the entire contents of his stomach at any moment. Daniel was about to fall unconscious, but before he could drop on the ground, a soft layer of cool soil wrapped around his legs. Daniel couldn't move on its own, so he needed the support of the stone golem. He slowly walked towards the scorpion's body and sticked his entire arm inside the large hole left by its missing leg. There were no bones nor muscles. The scorpion's insides were completely made out of a fatty white liquid that held no resistance against Daniel's arms. Daniel pulled out handful after handful of gooey paste, and after reaching the contents of the beast's chest, he finally felt a solid bead-like object with his hand. He rapidly took the bead-like core out of the scorpion's carcass, cleaned it with his shirt, and observed it carefully. There were no major differences between a rank 3 and a rank 4 beast core, except for one. The density of color of a rank 3 beast core was dense, almost opaque, while a beast core of the 4th rank resembled more a transparent bead filled with dense smoke. Daniel felt the terrifying beast essence contained within the beast core and realized that its purity wasn't nearly comparable to that of a rank 3 beast, but of course he expected that much. Reaching a different major stage didn't simply grant a quantitative change to one's essence, but also a qualitative one. Daniel pocketed the rank 4 core and walked slowly towards the centipede's body. Luckily, the beast's thorax had been smashed into pieces, so finding the beast core wasn't as hard. By looking up towards a big hole on the roof, Daniel could guess that various hours had passed since he had fallen into that sinkhole. He had good reason to believe that, even if the head hunter agreed to send a searching squad to look for him, they would most certainly wait for the morning after, as beasts became relentless during the night. Also, the head hunter couldn't force anyone to go look for him, and even if a good pay was offered, nobody would risk their lives to find a bronze hunter, which had fallen into a hole in the ground alongside 2 rank 4 beasts. Daniel's only option, right now, was to cultivate and recover. For the following minutes, Daniel forced all the remaining spiritual essence within his body out and turned it into earth essence. He summoned the stone golem once more and ordered it to wrap around his body. He then let go of the control over the earth essence, and the stone cover became a solid cavern that surrounded him completely. He finally fell on his behind, and with a few painful movements, he sat in a lotus position. In his hands were the 2 rank 4 beast cores. Daniel calmed his state of mind, and after activating time is precious, he started to cultivate. His aim was, of course, to reach perfection within the 3rd rank. So instead of pushing for a breakthrough, he guided the beast essence into refining his body once again. A few minutes into the cultivation, and Daniel realized how difficult controlling the pure essence was. No matter how much he focused, a good half of the beast essence would end up wandering inside his body without control, and consequently ended up being absorbed by his spirit. Seconds turned into minutes, and minutes turned into hours, until suddenly 5 days had passed. While lost in his cultivation, Daniel hadn't noticed that the injuries on his body had long disappeared, and the two B scores were now a fifth of the sizes they had been before. Something else he hadn't realized were the changes within his body. His muscles, bones, blood vessels, and organs were stronger than ever and almost on par with a rank 4 warrior. His spirit had evolved as well. In fact, it had become so dense that it could hardly be distinguished from his physical body. What was strange was that his powerful body, which radiated pure ki, was in no way an obstacle for his dense spirit. It felt like they had been made for one another. Daniel's focus had been interrupted abruptly by the familiar and intrusive appearance of a window within his mind. Asterisk, you can't do good without strength. Asterisk, first objective completed. Reward: 1,500 karma points. Asterisk, primary quest started. You can't do good without strength. Asterisk, description: obtain enough power to protect those in need. Second objective set: cultivate to the surrounding awareness of the martial cultivation or the profound spiritual synchronization of the spiritual cultivation. Optional: reach perfection before breaking through the next stage. Reward: karma plus 5,000 plus 10,000. Time limit: 1 year and 6 months. 2 years. After Daniel finished reading the content of the two windows, he felt ecstatic. He immediately focused on his profile, and a new window appeared within his mind. Dan Heel, Karmic Systems wielder. Age 14 rank. Peak rank 3 of martial cultivation. Perfect body. Peak rank 3 of spiritual cultivation. Perfect connection. Karma 1602. Weapons masteries. Details. Martial arts. Details. Skills. Details. Spells. Details. Reap what you've sown. Time is precious. LV. 1 system upgrades. Details.